Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. Got the whole gang here again. Cody Goodwin, your host, with Mike Rodak and Alex Scarborough. We are 6 games into the 2024 season, and I figured now would probably be a good time to take a step back and look at, or maybe take another look at, some of our preseason predictions. Now that we're midway through Alabama's 2024 schedule, they're 6 games in. They've got 6 games to go. The first 3 coming up here, I would argue, incredibly important to Alabama's potential postseason hopes. But I figured now would be a good time to look at some of our preseason predictions. I wanted to circle back on some of these because, one, that's just kind of the way the content machine works in the year of our Lord 2024, right? We do things down here so that we can do them again up here. But I wanted to circle back on some of these. One, kind of take a vibe check on some of our preseason predictions, see how we feel about them, if we want to stick with them, if we want to maybe amend some of them. So before we get going, I wanted to remind people, this was back episode 82, I believe it was. So 30 episodes ago. We've done a lot of podcasting since then. We made preseason predictions for Alabama. We made preseason predictions for the SEC, and we made preseason predictions for college football at large. I kind of left it open-ended, but hopeful that we would, kind of tap into the national college football conversation as we do covering one of the biggest brands in the SEC. But before we get started, before I circle back on some of these predictions, do you guys remember some of the preseason predictions that we made way back when?
No, I forget some of them, but I honestly, I have a more pressing question that I want to ask right now, because I was just scrolling through some NFL stories and I saw Lane Johnson of the Philadelphia Eagles, who said that the Eagles have a constipated offense. He said, that's what it effing feels like. We're definitely frustrated. We have a lot of ability, a lot of talent, and we are making games more competitive than they need to be. So the question I pose to you is Alabama constipated? That is what I want to know.
I mean, if we say they are explosive on offense and they haven't been as explosive lately, ergo, yes.
I catch your drift. Maybe not a good drift, but it's a drift. And maybe that's a good way to describe Alabama. They're just constipated, and they need to have some little explosion Saturday in Knoxville. We'll have to see. But I saw that headline and I was really drawn in by the concept of a constipated offense.
I don't know that the constipated offense is the issue. I think it's a leaky, runny defense that's Alabama's issue through the last 10 quarters.
What's the uniform combination? Are they wearing white breeches?
What's that joke about the captain that sees enemy ships on the horizon? Bring me my brown pants.
A little bit runny on offense.
We were going to spend too much time talking about Alabama today because I wanted to get to our preseason predictions. But I will say this, Alabama is starting to remind me a little bit of the 2018 Kansas City Chiefs, in that the only defense that could stop that Chiefs team was its own defense, in that just they couldn't stop anybody. So it kind of limited what the offense could do.
Yes, this Patrick Mahomes is essentially his rookie year, right? 2018.
Yeah, like first full year as a starter, just a rocket ship offense and a defense that was just Swiss cheese. So yeah, at least that's what it's felt like the last 10 quarters.
I don't know if I'm as high on the quarterback situation at Alabama.
It's not a perfect one for one.
I don't know if I'm as high in the offense, to be honest. Like, even when Mark Ingram said last week that he said Alabama's offense is elite, I was like, there's flashes of it. I think overall the product is good, but
they're not well-rounded.
Right. And these past 2 games, this past game, especially against South Carolina, I mean, the Jeremy Bernard touchdown was negative points. It should have been. So you really, they scored 20 points to me. I don't know. I'm not as high in the offense right now. I still think there's some issues to be worked out. Obviously, I'm higher on the offense than I am the defense. But I don't know if there's a huge people say that they're a Pac-12 team. They're like a Lincoln Riley team that can score a bunch of points and can't play defense. I think they can play defense sometimes. I think they can play offense sometimes. I just don't think they're doing it all that well. I think they're doing it better on offense than defense, though.
They have not found complimentary football yet this season.
Yes.
Maybe Wisconsin was the closest to it because you did see a little bit of the running game. But yeah, it's not. You're not winning time of possession regularly. Your turnover battles keep going back and forth, and just execution errors across the board. Whether you're talking about the offensive line and pass protection, or the defense, everywhere.
Every time you say complimentary football, I think of like Kirk Ferentz based football, and that is not a world I think Alabama wants to even sniff, let alone emulate. So I know that's not exactly what you were getting at, but that's just what comes to mind when you say complimentary football.
You clearly have some scars from the Kirk Ferentz ongoing era.
hell yeah, I do.
Probably more the Brian Ferentz era than the Kirk Ferentz era, but
that's probably fair. But speaking of, I don't know if speaking of complimentary football was the exact transition that I wanted to get to, but speaking of the offense that maybe not as well-rounded, let's dive into some of these preseason predictions and see if we want to keep them, amend them, hang on to them, that sort of thing, since we don't really remember too much about our preseason predictions, or at least you guys don't, because I went and found them, wrote them all down. Let's start with some of our Alabama preseason predictions. Alex, do you have any idea what you predicted in the preseason?
I know I predicted that the running game would be a lot better than it is. I think I made a Jalen Milroe Heisman prediction.
That was me.
Okay. Well, I just remember being really wrong on the running backs.
You said Justice and Jam will combine for over 1,800 rushing yards. You wanted to say 2,000, but you thought Jalen might, quote, gobble up some carries here and there. You also said, quote, Jalen will affect that number, but I don't think he's going to steal yards from them, being Justice and Jam. How do we feel about that prediction now?
Can I just interject for a quick second there?
Yes.
We talked about this at the time. Were those 12-game stat numbers, or are these total for the season? Because I think that's important context. If they end up playing 15 games, then the stats are different than 12 games.
I think in this particular preseason prediction episode, I don't know that we specified regular season versus the additional potential postseason games.
So just 1,800, regardless of how many games they play.
Are they on pace if they somehow get to 15 games?
So there's a realistic shot that they play 17 games, because you could go to the SEC championship game, lose, and then have to play 4 playoff games.
Right.
12 plus 1 plus 4.
Right. 609 they're at right now. So they're at 6 out of a possible.
Yeah, they're not on pace.
They're not on pace for 1,800.
17 is 35%. So 35% times 609 or divided 609 divided by 35% is 1,740. So yeah, they're just short.
I was told there would be no math.
Okay. So no, to answer your question, I don't feel great about it, and I don't get it. Like I got worked up on Sunday, and I'm going to get worked up again. Just give them the damn ball, especially when you build leads, like a 14-point lead against an inferior opponent. Maybe just hand them the ball and see what they can do. Because the worst thing that can happen is you eat up clock. And they haven't been winning the time of possession battle. And they're pretty talented. And Kalen DeBoer keeps saying they're both great all-around backs in their own right. Well, give them the ball more than a combined 15 times a game.
I'm not terribly worried about the time of possession thing, but I will say I think Milroe is getting a lot more run than maybe we thought when we made these predictions. I think that goes for all of us. And just the fact that the offense flows through Milroe, Mike, you have made this point almost weekly. That's just naturally going to take away carries and touches from other star players, specifically the running backs. I agree with you, Alex. I want to see them touch the ball more, like not even just carries, just get the ball in their hands and get them in space and let them go to work, because we think they're talented. There hasn't been a lot of opportunities for them to really show it.
So here's my retort to that. You have a 7-point, you score first or 7-0 in South Carolina. Next drive, you come out, you throw to Ryan Williams and first down. So people are saying, don't throw the ball to Ryan Williams. You want the ball in Justice Haynes' hands instead. Like, I think people want the ball in Ryan Williams' hands. So that was a 1-yard loss. Second down, Jamarian Miller, 2-yard gain. So then you put yourself in a 3rd and long. You're not running in 3rd and long. They eventually get the ball back because of that roughing the punter penalty. Guess what? 1st and 15 after a penalty, Justice Haynes gets the ball. What happened? 1-yard gain. You're not running the ball on 2nd and 14. So they need to run the ball well to run the ball more. If you're running for 2 yards on 2nd and 9, you're not running on third down. If you're running for 1 yard on 1st and 15, you're not running the ball more. That's part of the problem here. So it's you need to run the ball well to run the ball more. And yes, like that, they go up 14-0. What happens? Jalen Milrow, run up the middle, 3-yard loss on 1st down. Yeah, that's, I think, the sort of play where you can eliminate and run the ball there. I think some of those plays, but overall, like, you extend drives by running the ball well, and they haven't run the ball well at times too. Like, that's part of the problem.
There's another part of this conversation other than just feeding them the damn ball, which I insist you must do. Why aren't they better at run blocking?
Yes, that's the bigger question to make.
You're supposed to have the best interior line Pro Football Focus has ever seen. Man, they're decent in pass protection. Why aren't they better in run blocking?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why can't you run behind Big Caden Proctor? Boy can move. He should be able to clear some road, and it just doesn't happen.
I was going to say, you know why? Because people don't understand. South Carolina is a good team.
But again, how do you negate really strong pass rushers? You run right at them.
And to be fair, we saw that on Alabama's second touchdown drive, 7 plays, 67 yards. They ran it 6 times in a row for 54 yards. Again, Milrow had a 27-yard run smacked in the middle there, but they ran it back to back to back to back to back. And they moved the ball fairly well the entire way down the field. So we've seen it. It's been possible. Another fun stat that I really liked, against Vanderbilt, and game flow kind of ruined, I think, what they wanted to do. I still think that was the plan for that game, was to be the big Justice Haynes GM Miller game. But just because they got down 2 possessions early, they kind of had to adjust some things pretty quickly.
Moore alluded to that. Yeah.
Yeah. I if you go back and look at that game, they only ran on back-to-back plays like 4 times the entire game. Shout out to Cole Kublik for that stat. But 2 of the times on the second run, they scored touchdowns. Like, they, again, not a perfect stat, but just like kind of, hey, like, if you commit to this thing, usually good things happen, right? And we've seen evidence of that back-to-back games. I don't get it. It's very confusing. Mike, do you remember your Alabama prediction from the preseason?
No.
You're probably going to feel pretty good about it. Your prediction, Alabama would finish outside the top 5 in the SEC in defense for the first time since 2006.
Yeah, I guess I was right on that one, huh? Yeah, we were just talking about before the show. Do you know who's number 3 in the country in defense right now? Alex, do you know?
Who's number 3?
Yeah.
Number
3 in the country, not in the SEC.
Yeah, I'm guessing Ole Miss.
Ole Miss. Pete Golding in his defense, 3rd in the country right now.
Real quick, though, for context's sake, Furman, Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern, Kentucky, South Carolina, LSU.
And sorry, not Alex, Cody. Scoring defense, they're 3rd in the country.
Okay, because I pulled up total defense, and I'm like, that's Ohio State.
Right, you're correct.
If you're not in the top 10 playing that schedule against those offenses, come on, man.
Alabama's 42nd in the country in scoring defense, and they've played 1 team in the top 50 in total offense, that being Georgia. So currently, SEC-wise, if we're looking at scoring defense, Texas is number 1 in the country. Ole Miss is number 3. Tennessee's number 4. Kentucky's number 9. Missouri's number 12, so that's 5. A&M is 17. Georgia's 20, that's 7. Oklahoma is 27th, that's 8. Arkansas is 30th, that's 9. South Carolina is 38th, that's 10. Alabama and Auburn tied for 11th in the SEC, 11th. So not in the top 5. So I guess my prediction was accurate to this point.
Yeah, they're also 13th out of 16 in total defense, which is total yards given up per game. Not great, Bob. Not great. But Mike probably feels good for that prediction he made.
No, I mean, look, I'm not celebrating a bad defense, but I'm just celebrating my prediction being decently accurate to this point. The immediate here and now problem for Alabama is not just their defense, but it's Tennessee's defense, because Tennessee's defense is 2nd in the country in total yards right now. 249 per game is all they've given up. And scoring defense, they are 4th in the country, having only given up 10 points per game.
But to Alex's point on the Ole Miss argument, who has Tennessee played?
And Florida, which not a bastion of good offense, should have scored about 50 more points against them if they weren't big dummies in terms of penalties and errors inside the red zone.
Right. So if we want to take a look at something that's more adjusted towards opponents, we can go to ESPN's defensive efficiency rankings, in which case Tennessee ranks uno, number 1 in the country in defensive efficiency.
All right.
Ole Miss, number 4, which again gets adjusted for opponents.
All right.
Ole Miss is 4th in that. South Carolina is 6th. A&M's up there. Oklahoma's up there. Kentucky's up there. And then you get to Alabama. So Alabama is still outside of the top 5 in ESPN's defensive efficiency ranking at number 21 nationally. Again, they get some credit there, probably for having played Georgia more than anybody else. But that is a statistic that is adjusted for opponents and not just simply looking at yards or points.
I do think Tennessee's defense is good. I think James Pierce is a beast. I think they've got a lot of really good players on that side of the ball. But they have shown a little bit of susceptibility at times. Arkansas lose to them with a backup quarterback in the game. Florida moved the ball into the red zone pretty much at will. They just couldn't score. They're not perfect, but I don't think anybody is. And Alabama's far from perfect.
Yeah, Tennessee just lost Peely, their linebacker, Keenan Peely, yesterday due to a season-ending injury as well.
I think the thought that comes to my mind as you were reading off those defensive efficiency ratings was that South Carolina's defense might actually be pretty good.
Yeah,
Ole
Miss's defense might actually be pretty good too. Yeah, I mean, Alabama's defense looks better with some of those adjusted numbers. Alabama's offense is still ranked higher. They're 10th in efficiency. Tennessee at 46 right now, which is not what you would have expected from their offense this year. But this is obviously going to be a big game for Nico and that offensive scheme in general, but also a big game for Dylan Sampson. That Gain Womack was very high on yesterday when he was talking about him, the Tennessee running back.
My preseason prediction for Alabama is I thought Milroe would be in New York for the Heisman Trophy presentation. I didn't go so far to say that he would win it, but I think that he will be a finalist and he will go to New York for the presentation. I still feel pretty good about that, all things considered. I know there's been a few mistakes that have piled up here over the last couple games, the illegal forward pass, taking the safety, stepping into sacks against South Carolina, the couple of picks, really just the one really piss poor throw before halftime last Saturday against the Gamecocks. But I mean, overall, like the guy has played really, really well. I know he continues to put a dent in Alex's running back fever dream for Justice and Jam, but when the guy is able to produce in the way that he is, I think you have to do it, right?
It should not be a fever dream. 1,800 yards for your top 2 backs is not unreasonable. It's not unheard of.
Well, I'd hate to make Mike run the numbers again, but their top 2 running backs, at least based on pure production, is Jam Miller and Jalen Milroe. Do we think they can get to 1,800 yards?
They could. Yeah, because we don't sack adjust rushing yards. We do it for
right.
I tend to tabulate sack adjusted rushing yards, and when you have the sacks factored into it, it says Jalen Milroe only has 319 rushing yards. I think if you adjust for sacks, he's probably got somewhere closer to 450. Yeah, just ballparking that number.
He has 91 sack yards, so 91 plus 319 is 410, whatever it is.
We're doing a lot of math today, guys. We gotta calm down.
I was told there would be no math.
I don't do good math. Your point about the Heisman, I think it's certainly possible still that Jalen Milroe's there. I think obviously these next couple games, people are going to be watching the Tennessee game. People are watching the LSU game a lot. How he does in those games is going to go a long way. I think Cade Klubnik at LSU at Clemson is in a good spot because Clemson's schedule down the stretch is not particularly difficult. So if it's the ACC. I'm saying it's not. I think Carson Beck having to play Texas and Tennessee and having to play Ole Miss, Pete Golding's defense. I'm gonna just keep mentioning it. I think that's tougher for Carson Beck to make it to New York. I think Cade Klubnik having Clemson's schedule.
Their schedule hurts them because he won't have the big moment. I mean, what's the big game that Cade Klubnik's going to go out and throw 5 touchdowns?
They'll probably play Miami in the ACC championship game, and that will be that quarterback duel could decide who gets the ticket to New York.
And then everyone can yell at people for making their Heisman vote early, because that's what happens.
Right. I mean, it depends if people make their vote before or after the ACC championship game, because it's due that Monday after.
And whether they want to watch the ACC championship game at all.
But any sort of Heisman odds you're looking at right now, Klubnik's right on the edge of going to New York. So I don't know if he needs that moment because he's already kind of building up those stats. You build up those stats against Virginia, Louisville, Virginia Tech, Pittsburgh, the Citadel, and South Carolina. He could be in a decent spot there, even without having to go head to head with Cam Ward. I mean, maybe that will decide it, but I don't know if there's necessarily there needs to be one ACC participant. I think if Ashton Genty continues doing what he's doing at Boise State, he's going to be there. And then you have Quinn Ewers that Ewers is going to be playing on a huge stage this week against Georgia. So that helps him. After that, it probably opens up for Texas to have some games where he can build up those stats. So there's going to be competition for Milroe. There already is, obviously. Travis Hunter getting injured, I think, helps Milroe's chances.
Who should win it? Yes.
Right. And, who knows if something will happen late that will kind of disrupt the race. But, yeah, it's certainly possible that Milroe will be there. I think right now he's probably on the outside of that top 4. He's capable of getting back in there.
Our Alabama preseason predictions. Alex doesn't feel good about his, but Mike and I feel pretty good about ours. Do you guys remember your SEC predictions?
Said that the winner of the SEC will not be undefeated.
Yeah, for the second time in the last 9 seasons, Mike, you predicted that the SEC will not have an undefeated team. Hasn't happened since 2017. You made sure to include the caveat that it was conference games only. Mm-hmm. And as we look at the standings, most teams have only played 2, 3. I think there's a couple that have played 4 SEC games overall. Things are looking pretty good. 3 undefeated SEC teams remain as we hit mid-October. Texas A&M at 3-0, and then both Texas and LSU are at 2-0. And that's before Texas plays both. They play Georgia this weekend. They finish the game, or they finish their season with a game against A&M. LSU still has to host Alabama. They have to go to Texas A&M. They have to go to Arkansas this weekend. They finish up against Vandy and Oklahoma as well. They also have a trip to Florida. Probably feeling pretty good about this one, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, Texas is going to give me a run for my money. I think, obviously, if Texas beats Georgia at home this weekend, then they have to just get through A&M. A&M on the road for that last game is going to be interesting for them. I've talked about it before. A&M has a pretty clear path here. Even if they lose to Texas and they're not undefeated for the purpose of my prediction, they're still, I think, in a good spot for the championship game. LSU sneaky. If LSU plays well and Nussmeier looks like a really good quarterback, which he's starting to look like again, that's one where I can see them going to A&M and winning. I can see them, certainly going to Arkansas and winning. I can see them beating Alabama on their home field. LSU could give me a run for their money. I sort of feel good about that one, but there's teams capable of going undefeated right now. I think it's a 50-50 toss-up to me.
I think Texas is the most likely. I'm a little bit not as high on LSU as you are, just because as good as Nussmeier can be, and that touchdown pass to win the game was beautiful. There was a lot of interceptions. I think he's got 6 so far this year, threw 2 against Ole Miss on Saturday night. Really had to climb out of the hole that he kind of put himself into. So you wonder at what point does that kind of catch up with him? And the fact that they don't really have a dominant kind of running game and a defense that is better than it was a year ago, but is still, I don't think, anywhere near elite.
I think what's playing in your favor with regards to the prediction, Mike, is that A&M has to play both of those teams, and then you look at the schedules remaining for Texas and LSU, in addition to both having to play A&M, right? So there's going to be 2 losses there somewhere, either both for A&M or one for each. Just there's a lot of sneaky games here left on the schedule. So the idea that the SEC goes without an undefeated team in the regular season, I think very much on the table.
Maybe Diego Pavia does it for me against LSU. You said they still have to play Vandy?
At the end of the season, yeah.
Diego Pavia will come through to save my prediction.
Converted Mike. Alex, you're up next.
Okay.
Do you remember your SEC prediction? Yours was kind of funny. I had to write down a couple of different notes here.
Oh, was it my Lane Kiffin prediction?
You predicted that both Billy Napier and Sam Pittman would be fired before the season ends, which we're halfway through. On top of that, you predicted that not only Napier would get fired, but that Lane would flirt with the Florida job, and that Ole Miss would not make the playoff because that would be a distraction. I don't know that you got that exactly tit for tat, but Ole Miss already has 2 losses.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get how it would work, but it's working. Just Billy's fired. Billy's as good as gone. So
we keep saying that, but he's still there.
He's dead man walking. That's what that is. And I like Billy. Sam's the one that he might be able to play his way into another year.
Well, did that win over Tennessee save his job, at least for this season?
Not in and of itself. I think he's got I looked at the schedule the other day. I think if he goes 500 the rest of the way, I think he's probably safe. because they play LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Texas, Louisiana Tech, Missouri. You have to beat Mississippi State because they're terrible. You beat Louisiana Tech, and you find a way to win one of LSU, Ole Miss, Missouri. I think then you have a real shot. And what he has going for him, regardless of that, I thought Bobby Petrino would be the thing that gets him fired in that. He'd be the one who's, oh man, Sam doesn't look good. Look over there, Bobby. Can't believe I'm saying that. But their offense has not been that good. So I don't know that it's necessarily set up to hand it over to him, because I don't know how many people would be thrilled about that.
Yeah, these were odds. I think they're a week old. I'm looking at the odds for the top coach or the next coach to be fired is Dave Aranda, which makes sense. Baylor is only beaten Air Force and Tarleton State. Then it's Napier, Pittman, Mike Norvell. I don't see Mike Norvell getting fired. I just don't. I think you just gave him that big extension. I think you got to give him another year to get it back on track. Scott Satterfield at Cincinnati, Hugh Freeze at Auburn, Shane Beamer at South Carolina would be your highest betting odds right now to be fired.
Jury's still out on that one, so we'll see. We'll see ultimately what happens between Billy and Sam, and potentially Lane Kiffin. Since you,
the jury's not out on Billy Napier. He's not coaching Florida next year.
Believe it when I see it. My SEC prediction was that I did not think we'd see Georgia, Texas in the SEC championship game. I think just what we've seen now with Alabama's win over Georgia, and then Alabama losing to Vanderbilt, and you look at A&M's path and Texas, Georgia play this weekend. I think if there's just so many, like, I'd have to look up the tiebreakers, but like, I feel good about this prediction just because I don't really know what's going to happen. I think if Georgia beats Texas this weekend, they could both finish with one loss, and then depending on tiebreakers could both end up in Atlanta anyway. But like, if Texas beats Georgia, I really think that puts Georgia on the ropes for Atlanta specifically, because then you're looking at 2 losses. You're effectively a game and a half behind Alabama, and who knows how the rest of the season is going to unfold. But just as we stand here right now, 6 games into the season, I feel pretty good that this coming weekend, Georgia, Texas is the only Georgia, Texas game we will see this season. I guess maybe I shouldn't say that definitively, because who knows how the playoff bracket will ultimately come out. I still think both will get in, but I don't know that we'll at least see them in Atlanta.
It's all in front of Georgia. I mean, if they beat Texas this weekend, they're number 2 in the country behind Oregon, I would say. I would say they have the highest odds coming out of this weekend to win the national championship if they beat Texas. They still have to get through Ole Miss. They still have to get through Tennessee. But, I mean, the schedule's hard for Georgia, but it's in front of them, and they're a good team. And we'll have to see how they shake out. But, yeah, the possibility of them making the SEC championship game, to me, is still very much there. The possibility of Georgia, Texas being the result, I feel like, is harder, because if Texas loses, I mean, you're going to get into a wild 1-loss team tiebreaker if you have a 1-loss Texas, a 1-loss Georgia, or I guess it would be maybe a 2-loss Georgia in that case. You have all sorts of different things that can come out. A 1-loss Alabama, maybe a 1-loss A&M, a 1-loss Tennessee. Like, who the hell knows? Like, there could be so many different teams in there, and it's going to get wild trying to figure out some of those tiebreakers if that happens.
All that to say, I feel pretty good about that prediction. The last segment I had for this bold prediction, Mike shaking his head. I can't wait to see him take a victory lap here. Just college football predictions or something national at large. Mike, I'm going to let you take your victory lap here. Do you remember what you said?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Tyler. That is Dabo Swinney, and that is Clemson.
That was the worst Southern accent I've ever heard in my life.
Well, Dabo.
What is that?
I don't know.
You sound like a cat in heat.
Don't look now, but here comes Clemson. I feel like Rex Ryan now. God, big Clemson fan, Rex Ryan. Because Clemson is, I mean, you could have made an argument, given the way that Alabama played against South Carolina, and I'm sure that there's probably some AP voters that did this, moving Clemson ahead of Alabama on the AP ballot this past week. They're a top 10 team. My prediction was to state, to start off, was Clemson would be, did I say number 2 or number 3?
You said number 2. They see
number
you will.
2.
Okay. You said that they would make the playoff as one of the 2 best teams in the country.
Wow.
They still
best, not ranked best. Ooh.
They still have a shot if the SEC beats up on itself enough where there's not a clear number 1. If you have like a A&M LSU SEC championship game, something weird like that, because Georgia and Tennessee and Alabama just beat their skulls together, then I could see a Clemson, if they get past what the rest of their schedule is, if they get past Miami and Charlotte, I could see them being the 2 seed. That is still plausible. I think I said in my prediction, if you go back and read it, that they would lose to Georgia. And then if they run the table, that they would be in a good spot. And so far, that table is being ran because that is a Clemson team that is looking better. Clay Klubnik is looking better. They're scoring points. They've scored 66, 59, 40, 29, and 49 points over their last 5 games. And Tyler is probably crying in a heap in Spartanburg somewhere.
Why?
And I will say, you probably got a little bit of help with Oregon beating Ohio State this weekend too, because if they meet each other again in the Big Ten championship game, I think Ohio State would win a rematch. So then would you, in theory, if Clemson continues to win, would you put them above the Big Ten champ potentially? Will the SEC
Are you
eat
talking
itself?
about a number 1 seed Clemson in the college football playoff?
You said that, not me.
I mean, with our stupid playoff structure where conference champions get the top 4 seeds, I mean, anything is possible. I will say, though, I think between Louisville, Pitt, and South Carolina, they're going to lose one of those games. And then you've got to beat Miami in an ACC championship. Something tells me that Clemson will find its level even in very shallow ACC.
Losing to South Carolina at home to end their season would be interesting. Losing to Pitt, Eli Holstein, still doing the damn thing up at Pitt. That game is in Pittsburgh. That is probably their toughest game remaining, I would say. And then, toughest game remaining before potentially playing Miami.
There's 2 things we know about Mike from doing podcasts. Hates Kentucky, likes Clemson.
And look, is my hate of Kentucky not justified? The next coach fired odds. I mean, where's Mark Stoops? I mean, Kentucky is...
Mark Stoops ain't getting fired, man. Mark Stoops ain't getting fired.
We're not doing this. We're not doing this. I'm not
He's chilling.
Their offense is terrible.
Not going to do it.
Right, but their defense beat the best offense that nobody was supposedly talking about, right, Mike?
They did. And that is an embarrassing loss for Lane Kiffin, who was distracted by the Florida job.
We're not talking about Kentucky because it's going to make me mad.
Alex, do you remember you had 2 predictions in this segment on the preseason prediction?
I cheat a lot. I remember one of them, I think.
Yeah, the one you probably remember is NFL talk surrounding Kalen DeBoer. How do we feel about that?
I feel even more justified by it. I mean, I think I said 2 years from now. I think this year, I think I said that Jalen Milroe would be in the Heisman conversation, and that would lead to Kalen DeBoer and NFL discussions starting. I don't know that it will be more than discussions. That's not to say he will take a job, but I think he might be wanted to be interviewed for a job because of what he does with Jalen Milroe. These last 2 games have been a bit of a regression for Jalen Milroe, but you were still seeing a progression overall in terms of, I think, making the reads, the short to intermediate throws, those things he was not doing at the beginning of the year and last year. And if we know anything about the NFL, if you can't develop a quarterback, you don't get to coach in the NFL. If you can develop a quarterback, you can coach in the NFL as long as you want. So I think Kalen DeBoer doing that with Jalen Milroe, combined with the way he structures a program, I think it all kind of goes hand in hand. Again, I'm not saying he's taking a job. We're not doing that. I don't know what his desires are as it relates to the NFL, but I think somebody is going to ask him those questions sooner rather than later.
Look, we all know how fans here are going to react if they lose one or both of the Tennessee and LSU games. If they lose both, it is going to be a rough November for Kalen DeBoer around here. And that doesn't mean, though, that he's not good at developing quarterbacks. And that doesn't mean that he would not be good in an NFL role where it's just a little bit different in terms of culture and message and how to handle a locker room and all of that. So I would agree with Alex that it's something to consider and something that an NFL owner is going to back channel or directly ask or whatever you want to say and just see where he's at. And to be honest, I would not be surprised if it's already happened, because if Ryan Grubb was on the NFL radar before he even had the Seahawks interest, then I'm sure Kalen DeBoer was too. Maybe not for a head coaching job, but I'm sure that NFL teams have poked around Kalen DeBoer if they were poking around Ryan Grubb. I mean, that kind of goes hand in hand. And Grubb has done some good things with the Seahawks. so far this year, and their offense and Geno Smith has not been as good the last couple weeks, but that is kind of I don't say the canary in the coal mine, but it's like the test run for Kalen DeBoer's offense and his scheme in the NFL. And so far the results have been pretty good.
Do you remember, Alex, your second prediction when it came to college football, something national at large?
No, I don't.
You said that Deion Sanders would not be at Colorado after this season, that the wheels would come off, and that there would be no lasting impact. While I think that all remains to be seen, right, because Shedur's a senior and Travis Hunter is absolutely gone to the NFL after this season, Colorado Buffaloes 4-2, recently just lost a competitive game to a pretty good K-State team. So they're 2 wins away from bowl eligibility. When you look at the rest of their schedule, Arizona, Cincinnati, Texas Tech, Utah, at Kansas, Oklahoma State, I think the Buffs are going bowling this year.
It's possible. I mean, I gotta own that one. They're better than I thought they were going to be. Better than the first few games of the season seemed to indicate as well. I mean, they were kind of rocky early on, if I remember right. I still don't know about the future beyond this season because of what you laid out in terms of what they lose. I still don't know if we know what Deion's motivations are about whether he really wants to be there long term. Because there's going to be a certain point where he just goes, look, I was able to recruit above my level early on because of the newness of it. But there's another level that I don't know I can reach without being at a bigger program. And I think somebody might kick the tires and say, hey, we've got a little bit better situation here than you have at Colorado. Remains to be seen. I just still don't know how long he is for that job. Yeah, it looks like they're going bowling, but that still feels like a very tenuous deal when you're talking about really relying on a few star players and not having a complete roster. It could fall apart still, but as it stands right now, I do not feel great about that prediction overall.
I think there's still the possibility that Deion's gone after this season, but just and that, you can debate the impact, right? Because, if you want to look at wins on the field, okay, probably a little bit more to be desired. If you want to look at just the money he's brought into the university and the interest that he's built back around that once proud program, and just the fact that all the pregame shows were there, basically they camped out there all of last season and this, that, and the next, like you can debate impact. I don't know that the wheels have fallen off in the way that not just you, but I think a lot of us maybe thought they might, just given what the product on the field was last season. So kudos to Deion for that. And then, just the way that the Big 12 ultimately unfolded, like they're probably going to be playing some postseason ball. The interesting thing is we're assuming Shedur and Travis Hunter are both gone after this season. Yeah, would they even play in the bowl game?
Probably. That's a good question. Well, when one's your dad coaching the game, maybe you do play in it. I will say there might be we talked about firing odds and who's at the top of that list, and a job in the Big 12 that might be open where Deion Sanders made his name. Deion Sanders at Baylor might be really interesting. That's all I'm going to say about that.
That's an interesting thought. I'll wrap this up here real quick. My big picture college football prediction 30 shows ago was that I thought the Group of 5 playoff team would win their first playoff game. Who knows what the bracket will ultimately look like, but you look at the latest AP poll and you see some Group of 5 teams not only sneaking their way into the top 25, but perhaps even climbing the top 25. I'm looking at Boise State with Ashton Jeanty. I'm looking at both Army and Navy, who have just taken jackhammers to everybody that they've played so far this season. Both of those teams undefeated this deep into the season for the first time since, I believe, before World War II. I like that pick. I feel pretty good about that pick. I don't know if they're going to only be the 12th seed when they get into the college football playoff. I think there's a really weird roundabout take that maybe if Boise State just rolls through the Mountain West and maybe one of the other conferences ultimately cannibalize themselves, that maybe you should put them in as the 4 seed and then they get a first round bye because they're still technically conference champs, right? So then what do you do with the Big 12 champ, for example? Although BYU and Iowa State both still being undefeated this far into the season probably throws a wrench into that conversation. But I feel pretty good about the idea of Boise State potentially winning. I'm assuming they're the Group of 5 team that makes the playoff. I feel pretty good about them potentially winning their first round game, depending on who the 5 seed is.
Yeah, it's going to be a damn good team because it's probably going to be the best team in the SEC or Big 10 that's not a conference champion. So it could be in Ohio State. Could be.
Are you telling me potentially? Here's a fun thought exercise. Could they have a rematch with Oregon, who they almost beat a few weeks ago anyway?
Maybe, and maybe that's their best hope. But like Boise State going to Georgia in December, like I ain't picking them.
Well, what makes you think Georgia's going to be the 5 seed?
I'm just saying. Even Ohio State.
2 weeks ago, we were talking about Alabama being a top 4 seed, and then they lost at Vanderbilt. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about Tennessee being a potential top 4 seed. They lost to Arkansas. If this season has taught us anything, I think it's that there are no elite teams in college football, and that weird shit will happen. So, while by and large, I probably laughed at your prediction a couple months ago, I'm not laughing at it now.
I'm still laughing. I'll laugh. And look, this is not something that will be proven until December 20th, whatever it is. So we can go in circles on October 15th about it, but I just don't see it. I don't see it because I think that number 5 seed is going to be a really good team. It's just a product of the cannibalization that we're talking about.
While all of that is true, these were bold predictions. And I don't know, 6 games / 7 weeks into the season, 8 if you count week 0. I feel pretty good about potentially Boise State or potentially an Army or a Navy sneaking in there and maybe making some first round noise. We'll ultimately see what happens. There's a lot of season left. That was kind of a quick rerun through of our preseason predictions. We, feel good about some, feel not very good about others. We'll have to revisit these and maybe some other preseason conversations that we had as we get later into the season to see how we feel about some of those. But yeah, that's all we've got on today's show, guys. We'll be back sometime Thursday. I think I'm going to give these guys the Thursday show off. We're going to link up with the Go Falls 247 crew to discuss Alabama, Tennessee. Pretty big game in Knoxville coming up this Saturday. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 247 Sports. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. We'll talk to you all again soon.